Okay. Go do it.
Hey, this is John Murray. You are watching the Break It Down show.
That's right, man. We're doing this thing. One of the fun things about having a show is that I get to have people from my past on. And, here's a funny thing, John, is when I tell people I'm a spy or I was a spy, they're like, yeah, whatever. And even when I was, and I'm like, yeah, I work, I gather intelligence, I'm a spy. It's no big deal. They never, ever believe me. And then they downplay,
I get that. I've had that too, to the point where I stopped even, people like, what do you do in the Army? And I'm like, it's just too long to tell you all of it. Cause I didn't start out as a 97 Bravo. I started out as the dregs of MI as a 96 Romeo. So, we were like the bastard children of MI, but, and I'm like, and I finally graduated and became a 97 Bravo or a spy. And people who still don't believe it, I'm like, well, here, take a look at the back wall. You can read it.
There's something about it. Like if you say you're CIA, there's bona fides in that. Right. And this is for the audience, this, but
sure.
If you're in the CIA, it doesn't mean you did shit like we did.
Yeah, exactly. It really does. There are people who are in the CIA their whole career and never got to do anything cool. Never got to do something that was really like something that 25 years from now you'd want to break, into your family meeting and go, hey, guess what I did? A lot of them don't get that.
I would say 7/8 of the CIA would trade spots with us in a minute.
Absolutely. Because in the tactical environment, it's almost like the wild, wild west. Almost anything goes, and you do get the opportunity to do what you need to do. And then later on say things like, I didn't know I couldn't do that. So,
well, there's so many things by regulation that we can do,
right. Exactly.
And we won't get too deep into the regulations. All of a sudden we'll be classified territory, but there's a lot of things where you're like, oh my goodness. So like one of the times, and this is not classified. We have the ability to acquire and give booze to people.
Absolutely. Oh my God. Yeah. Best thing in the world.
And so, you'd go back to headquarters, grab your box of booze, throw it in the back. You wouldn't make a big deal about it. But I came into Lukovac one time and we were picking up our box of booze. And while I was gone, the commander's patrol had to go somewhere else. Right. And then the driver, his name is Sergeant Beebe, he's like, hey, your box opened. And I'm like, that's all you can't talk about.
You don't say a word. That's right. That's right. I used to, when we were in the Balkans, I kept in my canteens, one was water and one was always Jack Daniels. And, you'd go and meet somebody. And the quickest way to almost anybody's heart that you're dealing with overseas is either American cigarettes or booze. And I would hand the mayor, that we were going to talk to, the canteen, and you'd be, start to push it away. And I'd be like, give it a try. And the eyes would just light up, which was so much better than that rakia that they were forcing on. Oh, that was nasty. Ooh, that was rough.
Schlivo and a shot of Yeah.
You just went over my entire knowledge of the Serbo-Croat language. That was it. I could order a beer with the best of them in Bosnia.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this, because when we deployed, I would say that we opened a new era of how tactical human happens.
Absolutely.
Like what it takes to do that. Because before that, it was really Cold War focused, and there wasn't enough time to really do it during Desert Storm and Desert Shield. I mean, yes, there was collection going on, but not like what we were doing.
No. We were doing more of a, kind of a stand in place and really trying to run around and figure out the personalities, the key players. It was very different. And I remember we were force fed the guise of force protection, which, there's still not a good definition of what that actually is. And it was tough to get some of the commanders that we supported. It was tough to get them on board to understand, I'm leaving this perimeter and it's just me and my 3 guys. That's it. Yeah. And they were like, you're what? And they finally, I was like, listen, you tell me what you need to know from the locals and I'll get it for you, but you got to let me do my thing.
Yeah.
And it was a very new and it was a great dynamic. It was something that obviously, there are guys who were in other conflicts who did similar things, but they were illegal when they did them in other conflicts. And for us, it was very different. And honestly, it made me probably a much better agent than I ever would have been had I not deployed.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I try to explain to people is when you're on a team, a CI team or a tactical human team, all you do is work. So
Yeah.
you have to do all of your maintenance of the team, making nice with the local command and the local NCO. So someone's always and you can't have anybody screw that up. If there's 4 people, all 4 of them have to be on the same page.
Absolutely
And
right. Yeah.
there's not enough of you as the team NCO or the team chief or whoever. There's not enough of you guys to go around to all that. So you have to maintain the team's ability to live and operate on the camp and get off the camp. And that takes constant maintenance. And then you have to do pre-planning for whatever mission you're going to do.
Exactly.
You got to go on the mission, which might take 10 hours. You never know.
Might take 2, might take 10, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then you got to come back and then produce reports.
Right. That was the one thing that I think failed a lot of people, is that it didn't matter if it was 3 a.m. You got to write that report before you go to bed. You can't let any of what's in your brain have that rust factor the next day if you're trying to recapture it. So it was rough. I don't think in Bosnia, I don't think I slept more than maybe 4 hours ever in any, sustained sleep pattern. It was just crazy.
When you look at the jobs you can do in the military, ours is man for man, woman for woman, whatever, is one of the hardest in terms of how much stuff you have to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
And go outside the wire.
And go outside the wire. That's the thing. So once you're outside, inside the wire, you're doing all that maintenance with, making sure that whatever commander you're supporting understands, I'm here, I'm eating your food, I'm using your electricity, but you don't own me, which was such a hard one to build. And then on top of all of that, inside the wire, once you go outside the wire, if you need help, it's going to be more than a few minutes away. It's going to be quite a while, because they're not going to roll out of the wire with anything less than a 4-vehicle element. And by the time they get that quick reaction force together, things can go south quick. So it was interesting. It was a lot of fun. Probably my favorite time in my career.
Well, I want to spend some time outside the wire, but first I want to talk about this inside, because you're right. The commander, and when you say commander, really it's commanders, right? Because
exactly right.
Our parent unit that we actually belong to, and we have to serve them as well. They're a client. Right. And then you might have other commanders. So just illustrating this, we had Miss Smith. She's been on the show before, but we've been out all day and we had drank and everything. And it sounds like that's fun. And it is. It's a riot. We had a great time. But it also, you need to come back and write a report, and you're hammered,
Yeah, that's the worst.
You're working through it, and and it just takes a long time. And we had been at it for days on end. And so she's like, you and Greg chill out tomorrow, relax, and then we'll just work a late day, like a swing shift day. And so we were sitting outside in the sun, kind of like Hawkeye and BJ. We had a couple cocktails, no one knows, but that was our time to relax and to recoup, because we needed to. And the chemical unit that had no job except for driving around and doing patrols, they saw us there and they got pissed. So they brought it up in the command, in like the daily command briefing at the end of the day, how we were laying there, and if the E4s are laying around, they should be helping out with guard duty. And
doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And so, and Miss Smith had done a great job in fighting for us, keep us off details, because if we were gone, the team is non-operational,
Right.
So
Exactly.
Side, we couldn't do it. And this is what goes to what you're talking about. Like, we cannot do guard duty. We cannot fill sandbags. It's not our job. We might have to investigate these guys. So
exactly. You can't rub elbows with the inside the wire soldiers. You care about them because it's your base camp, more or less. Right. But at the same time, it's tough for people. It was very tough up in Gradacic, where I was, because the team chief was not very well read on those regulations, and so he would go into the meetings with the staff, the battle staff, and whatnot. And he'd come out and he'd be like, well, they really want your guys to do KP. And I was like, go tell them no.
Yeah.
And I was a staff sergeant then, and he's like, he didn't want to. He was a W-2, and he didn't want to, and rightfully so. He was not used to that. So here I am going to the sergeant major for whatever unit and saying, hey, my guys don't do detail, and here's why. And by the way, here's the reg. And I hand it to them. And they would look at the reg and be like, this reg is bullshit. I'm like, yeah, sorry, it is what it is.
It's still a reg.
It is what it is. We can't do those things. And
not every team won that fight.
No, they did not.
We had CI agents burning poop.
Yep.
Which is
Well, listen, it's a great character building exercise at some point in your career, but not when you're deployed in an environment where, like you said, we may have to investigate somebody there. We're definitely going to be doing, quote unquote, force protection operations for the base camp. Yeah. We have other things we got to do. Our priorities are not your priorities. And then you got to say, and oh, by the way, thanks for all that free chow you're giving us.
And our living conditions, we actually have a regulation on that too.
That's exactly right. Oh, that would flip them out. They finally solved that where we were by giving us we were in the burned out rubber factory is what it was from before the war started. And the engineers had built all these gigantic cubicles for groups of people. Like they would put 24 in one of these cubes. Yeah. And so when we moved in, I was like, good, this is ours. It was huge for just the four of us. And the commander flipped. So we actually relented a little bit and had the engineers build a wall in between us and the civil affairs guys.
Right.
Which was okay because most of the civil affairs teams in country were all spec ops guys. And they knew the deal. They left us alone. We left them alone, but we also used them to travel quite a bit.
Because we didn't have enough stuff to go out, nope. We had to borrow Marines, and it's like, oh, you can go on a 2-vehicle convoy, but one of you has to have, a towing arm. And I'm like, well, we don't have one of those.
Yeah. What's that? I had one of those when I was in the 82nd at Bragg, but we didn't go into country with tow arms. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And by the way, I don't even have a radio.
Exactly. We had those little walkie-talkies that we used. And those things were only good for maybe, a kilometer at best. After that, those are all radio line of sight. You're not hearing that. So,
I want to spend time in this part because it shows you just how hard it is just to operate on a camp, because it's easy to get kicked off of someone's camp. You guys are doing
very easy. Yeah.
And there's plenty of warrant officers, people with a lot of rank, who are terrified to say no to a commander. And then you have this Smith, who's a W1, and these guys complain about us sleeping in on a Sunday. And she's like, and she stands up in front of all of this. She's the lowest ranking officer in that room. Yeah. And she's like, tell your guys to get better GT scores.
I love that. Yeah, she was awesome.
Yeah. And then the colonel looks at the guy from the chemical, the captain, and he's like, you got a problem with that? Yeah, and then you already know the answer. No, sir. It's perfect. Yep. Thank you.
Well, we had at one point, I don't know if you remember Lieutenant Dooley.
Yeah.
So Lieutenant Dooley came up. The little guy. He was like 5'4" at best.
Yeah.
And he came up and was explaining these things to the commander. And I was like, sir, I've already done that. We don't have a problem here. We're fine. He's like, no, Sergeant Murray, I need to talk to him. And I was like, oh God, he's going to wreck it. And he did his best to try it, but the commander was like, that staff over there already told me. And he's kind of like looking at him because we had a lieutenant colonel running our base camp, and he's looking at Cody Dooley like, and I already know this. Yeah. It was hilarious. But the rapport building inside the wire is something that gets really overlooked. You're absolutely right. I mean,
there's no doctrine on it. No. And then the commanders don't know. Like they just don't know. Like
they legit don't know. Yeah.
They don't want to give it up. They want the resource, but they don't know like how to provision it and what's right and what's not. And we have badges. We have fucking badges.
Exactly. That's what got, we had, I went to only a handful of the command and staff meetings because I was like, listen, anything that I have to tell your S2 or your G2, I'm not going to say it in an open command and staff meeting. We're going to talk about it off camera somewhere because it's not for everybody to know. And but thankfully, the S2 for Woman Cav that I was attached to was a really, really smart, intel loving guy. And we had our PIR from 165th, which was the overarching entire work area, if for lack of a better term, the entire AO. But I would sit with their S2 and just say, listen, tell me what you want to know locally and I'll get it for you. You don't need to go, you're going to make a request to your G2. Your G2 is going to make a request to the task force 2, and it's going to come back down 2 weeks later. Just let me know what you need to know now. I'm going out tonight. And that used to drive me crazy. We would go out at night alone on foot.
Yeah.
And that used to boy, they would tweak, but I'd be like, listen, this is my job. We have a meeting scheduled. I have to go. And they'd be like, you guys are out there all alone. We'll be fine. The locals know us and like us. We'll be fine.
Yeah, that's our job.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you're right. It is a very difficult relationship to foster. And if you're not good at PR work as an agent, you're going to do like a lot of our teams did, and you're just going to sit inside the wire and get nothing done. You're going to end up being a lot of the teams ended up being convoy security for other elements, and not able to do their job, and that was tough. I felt bad for them, but I was not going to trade places with them.
We were talking about Bart Dotchko, who was my NCO on that team, and he was great in that he let us do the work. He's like, you guys are the E4s. You're going to do the work. I'll tell you what to do. I'll proof it, and then we're going to deliver that product. And he was right. Because, and you and I both know, we did not train to go do this. We learned about driving over and over again.
Yep. Exactly. Don't go off the road. There's a landmine. We learned that. Well,
yeah. It's snow. If it's foggy, poke your head out the window.
That's right.
But we didn't work on barely at all, like role playing and having like we had done a lot of that sort of in a vacuum. We had done it for pre-deployment stuff, but we weren't really ready for the job at all.
No. It was definitely learn off the cuff, learn as you go. And as long as everything you're doing is A, within the rules of engagement, and B, within 670 or not 670 3460, as long as you're paying attention to what you're supposed to do, you're probably going to be okay. But it was a tough existence. I was lucky. I was actually working with all three former warring factions, the Bosnian Muslims, Bosnian Serbs, and the Croats, which was amazing. But towards the end, when we had that little, that time of mission creep, I became very cynical. I was like, I've really had enough of this. It's time for me to go.
Well, it is. It's hard to maintain the op tempo. For us, it slowed down in our area. We had it wired pretty tight. Whatever risk was going through, we weren't going to find it, even if it was there.
Right. Exactly.
But the day-to-day going outside the wire stuff and not being trained up on how to do that, and really honestly not being properly provisioned. I mean, you remember we were switching over to 9mm only.
Right.
We were in the middle of that. And so we would go out on patrol and there'd be 2 M16s and there'd be 2
9mm. Yeah. Same with us. And I used to think, because the team chief had a 9mm, I had a 9mm, and then Tom Gage, Mike Moore had M16s. And I'm thinking to myself, going back to my days at Bragg, I'm thinking to myself, if it hits the fan, we are so screwed.
Yeah.
We cannot. The best we can do is fire some shots and run like hell.
Yeah. And this is something I've come to realize even more as I've gotten older. It's just how exposed we were. We drove up and we found an army camp, like a legitimate army camp, but you don't know. You don't know.
Yeah, true.
And so we drive up to it, and Bart's like, it's not my meeting. And so he's like, Pete, you stay with the vehicle, keep it running, and I want you to write down, remember patches, people, count, figure everything you can. And I'm sitting there, and we're in a valley. We're at the bottom of the valley, and I'm like,
"That's the worst.
Anything happen?
That is the worst. That was our entire base camp in Ratchets. Yeah. It was like a bowl. Yeah. Looking around, and I'll never forget the commander, the troop commander for 1-1 Cav that we were supporting wanted to start having PT formations at 6 a.m. doing group PT, and so I took my team out one morning at about 4 a.m. And we got way up on a ridge line, and we just took digital pictures of what the base camp looked like when the formations were going on. And I went back that day and I grabbed the S2, and we printed the pictures out and everything. I grabbed the S2 and I said, this is what you guys look like at 6 a.m. And I was like, tell me, LT, he was an LT. I was like, tell me, LT, if somebody launches a couple of mortars, how many people are they going to wipe out? And he was just like, oh God, we got to stop doing this. And I was like, when they first said it, I was like, hey, enjoy that. Me and my guys do PT in the gym, and we do it alone. So have fun. We're not going to be in a formation at 6 a.m. in a hostile environment.
Yeah. And ultimately we lose that battle because the Army still, even though it's against doctrine, they still form up and they do group PT and they run around the edge of the fucking camp and everything.
They do stupid stuff. But and you're right, you can't stop it. We had right after you remember when the line in the zone of separation changed at I don't know, N+90 or whatever. we were rolling through. They used to do the 1-1 Cav love to call them thunder runs. We were rolling through on a thunder run where they're just, a couple of APCs and every Humvee being as loud as you can, just to kind of, I guess, show your package, so to speak. Yeah. And we were rolling through, and we saw it had to be at least 20 guys ditching into this house, and they stopped, and they were like, "Sergeant Murray, go find out what that is." And I'm like, "You go find out what the hell that is." But we went, and we found one of the biggest weapons caches at that point in the country, because they, we used to say, it's great that the Dayton Accord said these lines are moving. And for those of you listening, the zone of separation is kind of like the DMZ. And we knew that things were changing, but we certainly didn't communicate it to the quote unquote enemy warfighters on the ground. So they had no idea what they were doing was wrong. And we ended up taking every weapon that day, and it was a bunch. We got so much out of that one. Ton of rifles, AKs, tons and tons of hand grenades, ammunition. I was like, man, this is beautiful. And we just happened upon it. And I think that happens a lot too in CI work is, it's something that you just kind of happen upon. It's not what you were planning to do.
Yeah. Hard work equals opportunity. And which those things that you never could have had, because it's not the first person you meet, it's the fifth person in that chain.
Exactly right. Yep.
When we were pre-deployment, we're trying to get ready to go. I still don't know. I know we're going to talk to people, but what happens between we let and then talk to you? How do you do all of that?
That's what. Yeah, you're right, because if you remember, they were doing elections as well at one point, and all of a sudden, all of our PIR shifted to the election.
Let me say this: PIR is basically information, specific things they want, and there's like PIR, FIR. All I know is just this is the stuff. These are like the single questions they want us to find out. Like, will there be a bomb? Will there be an election? Will people try to compromise the election? We're trying to
exactly right. Yeah, and so go ahead. So you would get, all of a sudden we had brand new and completely it was critical, and they needed to know this stuff in a couple of days, and I was like, what you don't get is the time it takes to cultivate a relationship with somebody on the ground to where they trust you to discuss it with you. You may have 20 meetings with that person, and all you're talking about is their family, how they made it through the war, the things they did in the war, which you're also, keeping the mental note because you're going to do a report on it. But all of a sudden it tainted that relationship when you had to go, hey, I need to know this about this group of people, and I need it in 2 days. It just doesn't work right. And I think that was probably the toughest thing to overcome with some of the commanders is they would, they had their intelligence requirements. And if they didn't jive with, ours from our parent unit, we would, I'll do the best I can, but that's not what I'm going after this week or this month or this quarter. I'm going after something different. And it became a huge bone of contention. And as it turned out, the elections went fine.
Yeah.
But it was tough to try to gather any intel on them when you're just
kind of know that going in. We didn't know any of this going in. And one of the things that go ahead.
No, I think what I was going to say is I think we would have been far better suited if they trained us on the Dayton Accord and the expectations of the Dayton Accord, which, all of us, all we knew is, okay, they signed this peace treaty, and now we're going to go in. And it was the first mission really for the military of peace enforcement rather than peacekeeping. Yeah. Totally different thing. And so it was, you had to be, you put on so many different hats trying to maintain all that.
Yeah. One of the things too, when you write a report, a lot of teams, and I think it's the standard, at least it was, like to write down which PIR you were answering. And I talked to Bart and I'm like, let's not do that. Let's just not spend time figuring out I don't want to encode it. We get to go to the field. That's our job. You guys want to encode something? Here's the report. You got
exactly. And see, that's what we had started doing. Us and I don't know if you remember Bob Thomas.
Sure.
Yep. Yeah. Bob was on one of the other teams. Bob was closest to me. He was probably about 25 kilometers away, 30 kilometers away. And he and I early on were, the very first night in country when they said everybody is, bound by General Order Number 1. I've got pictures of me and Bob finishing off a case of beer in his tent. But Bob and I early on did kind of the same thing. We're just going to get into intel, and we're going to get a bunch of it. We're just going to report everything we have. you can pick the pieces out. You know, if you're doing your job right and you're just reporting everything you see, somebody's going to find something that they needed out of it. And it really is just making sure that everybody on the team knows this is what we're looking at. Let's go take care of that, which is still, that can be challenging as well, for sure.
One of the things too, when you write those reports, is that someone else, well, look at this. Look what just happened.
Uh-oh, who is it?
That must be Captain.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my gosh. What did I miss? Catch me up.
Well, we just told on everything that you told us to do that was illegal. That's all.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
It was Paul Norwood that was the good captain.
I knew John Murray was coming on. I was like, I better get on there to make sure he doesn't say something crazy. Or something.
We're saving that for the second half.
Oh, right. Okay.
Great to see you. Great to see you.
I was just about to say to John, like, when we write reports, if the intel we find is, let's say, value 1, but the person analyzing it and reading it thinks it's value 3, and it's like the opposite. Like, exactly, hey, everything seems to be calm here. They're like, tensions are high, and Zivanic, whatever. And so you always had to write these things with an audience multiple layers above you that you would never know. Like, okay, you guys at headquarters weren't going to screw it up or nothing, but you just don't know. One line is going to get pulled out from a whole entire, report.
Well, it's funny because when we were at Huachuca, I taught some of the officers report writing in the counterintel course, and sir, I don't know if you remember Captain Klein Smith, or I don't even. Would you finish up as Colonel?
Major.
Okay. We I was a 96 Romeo before I was an intel guy, and I used to tell all these, and it was funny because some of these lieutenants ended up, one of them was my commander at Fort Gordon, and I was like, listen, if you write your report so any 96 Romeo can read it and understand it, it's a good report. If you get too much more into the weeds and it's, it's not rudimentary at its core value, really good, then you've lost your audience. And it was funny because I forget his name too, but he was my commander for a little bit at Gordon. And he was like, that's the only piece of advice I ever took out of that course that lasted me. He's like, all this crap. And he's writing stuff for our battalion commander at that point. Right. It had nothing to do with intel, but he's like, yep, no third person, all first person, present tense. I was like, now I feel like all I ever taught was, the grammatical correctness, but
that's okay. I mean, I have the one, I still have the one line that you gave me that I still remember. And that was the advice that I took. And it was when we were in Hungary after deployment, when we were in the process of redeploying from Bosnia, and one of the stations was go to Tazar, Hungary. We had to stay there for 10 days to decompress. And we were just essentially hanging out, by this, I guess it was an old Hungarian Air Force or Warsaw Pact Air Force bunker, essentially, was where we had our connects. We hung out there all day, and a bus would come pick us up. And the Hungarian bus driver was giving me all kinds of grief about getting everybody on board and where we wanted to go and everything. And I hear this voice behind me that I know is John, because I hear this, we should break his legs, boss? And that's all I remember. It's just like I felt that. I felt so good to hear that, because I finally had just after the entire time of command, which was honestly a very tough time. Sure. It's one of the hardest jobs I ever had, is finally having somebody that was willing to break somebody's legs for me.
Amen.
That I knew right then. I was like, all right, I did something right.
Yep, it was. I use that a lot. You want us to break his knees?
Yeah, I was so tempted to just say, I'm going to get off early, and you guys do whatever you need to do.
Oh my good, that is one of my perennial one-liners. I use it now in the. I'm a director in a healthcare company. And, it's a very the other employees and contractors. We have to be very PC, but every once in a while, I'm like, to my boss, who's actually, I've known her since high school. We've been friends for the longest time. And I'll say in our meetings, you want us to break their knees? And she's like, not yet.
That's perfect. And John, I actually met you in 1995 before I even came to the 165th. And while you guys were in Grafenwehr doing your validation exercise.
Yep.
Beforehand, I was one of the observer controllers that had to go to 1st Brigade, 1st Armored Division TOC.
Right.
And I was totally taken aback. 'Cause I walked through into the motor pool and I saw a guy with the 165th or the 205th patch on,
Right.
but he's guarding a motor pool. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. There's a counterintelligence agent guarding a motor pool. That's the mentality of how these guys are approaching this real world deployment.
Perfectly put.
And I spent some time talking with you, whatever. You had no idea who I was, but I remember, I was like, okay, I'm going to remember this guy because he's a totally squared away, but a totally wasted asset, just sitting there, freezing in December.
It was ridiculous. Yeah, it was absolutely ridiculous. I will never forget that. I do remember meeting you then. And I'm sure that I had some very choice invectives for the whole situation, but it blew me away. And we had to, what you just touched on, Pete and I were already talking about it. It was such a difficult dance to get commanders to understand we aren't just, warm meat in a flesh casing. We've got a little bit of gray matter between the ears, and we're going to, I remember telling one company commander, my team can either make you look amazing or we can make you look really bad, and the choice is yours. We'll go out and do everything you need us to do. And I was telling Pete, we would always give whoever we were with, whatever. I was with 1-1 Cav in Kardachits, we would satisfy their PIR along with our own, and give them that intel. And it was just such a tough dance to maintain. You were really managing a lot of different personalities. And when I was an instructor at Huachuca for the 97 Bravos and the Intelligence and Combating Terrorism course, that was one of the things that I hammered on these guys all the time is, listen, it's not about snooping and being a spy. A lot of this is relationship management. And if you don't learn how to do that up front, you're never going to get off the base camp. So it was interesting, very interesting stuff.
So the speed as well too, right? That's the other thing I learned was if you take 2 days to write a report, may as well not write it. It's over.
Exactly. It's perishable. And honestly, Pete, that's one of the things when I was teaching the officers at Huachuca, I would tell them the best intel gather. If you don't report it correctly and timely, it's wasted. You wasted a ton of assets on something that has already perished, and it's no longer actionable.
Let's talk a little bit about when we do leave camp. So like you were saying before, you guys would walk off. There was in our little cluster, there was a 2-vehicle exemption, which was not meant for operations. It was meant for A to B transportation, but we needed that.
We
didn't have 4 vehicles.
Well, exactly. That's what they didn't understand when they took us in. We're here, we're in your wire, but I need more from you than I'm going to give you back. And that was tough. But yeah, we ended up a lot of our missions because a lot of the stuff came out of Gradachits and Modrica. So anybody that was leaving base camp that had a convoy going wherever we needed to go, we would tag along. So it was that in the mornings a lot. I'd have the Humvee fired up and I would just sit there and wait for somebody else leaving and be like, where are you going? And, wherever they said they were going, if we had stuff we had to do there, be like, great, we're coming with. So it was, that was tough. And a lot of commanders didn't, they had a tough time with a team of 4 people walking out of the base camp and saying, it's noon and saying, I'll probably be back by 10 o'clock tonight. And they would flip. They would that was not a warm and fuzzy.
That was the problem with the base camp mentality. And honestly, we took that into Iraq with us. The first, I wasn't part of the military then, but I could see the issues of bunkering, hunkering down, in the bunker mentality on the base camps that it wasn't until where they had the surge of 2006 that started it for the first several years. The watchword was, if you're going to be a successful commander there, you have to bring out everybody you brought in. That was the only measure of success. Not that you've achieved the mission. Is that nothing bad happened, and so guess what happened? Lots of bad things.
Exactly right. Yep.
So that's, and I knew that because I was running the INSCOM training program where we were sending instructors out to teach DSIGs. We're sending them out to different base camps, and they just when they came back, they said, the amount of the incredible amount of restrictions to do anything on the base camp, and then to get off was next to impossible. To go from one to another, I was like, this is as bad as it was in the Balkans, and in the Balkans it was the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, I was very lucky in the area I was at. We had greased the skids enough that if we had to have a convoy, we would either take the PSYOPs or civil affairs guys with us. So that's that. And we'd have one Humvee from 11 Cav, which I always didn't, I never liked that because they always had a 50 cal on a mount on the vehicle. And I was like, I can't do my job. When you roll into a town and you've got a guy sitting on that 50 and he's just swinging around and watching people. I get the tactical need for it.
Right.
Very, very well. I mean, I was in the 82nd a long time. I understand that, but I got to be able to talk to people that aren't terrified.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, but we were lucky in the area I was doing with 11 Cav. We were able to get off base camp probably more than most of the teams in country. We had a lot of leeway, which thank goodness. Actually, I think one of the commanders there was hoping, God, I hope they just don't come back. So, but we kept coming back and we kept giving them intel. So
this ability to get off the camp, it is rare. We were able to do it in part because Bart got us to do a vulnerability assessment, and no one had done that. Right. And then that became like our team product, and so we got shopped out. We went to all kinds of places. We went to, it must have been 10 different camps to go specific, not just in our cluster. Well, we got pushed out to some hilltop somewhere with a bunch of Delta Force guys on there, and they're like, "We don't know why you're here. Just draw a picture of the concertina and leave," And so we did our job, and we did that. But that also made us valuable to the command. We could say, "Hey, we have to go do this. We'll be gone for a week." Like, "Where are you going?" Like, well, we can't tell you. But if you look at Sarajevo, that's probably where we'll be. Whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so when he got us back, he's like, "Man, I got to keep these guys around." And so he fought even harder for us to keep us there. But we had to leave, and he got it. We had to leave the camp every day. What I want to ask you, John, is you get to a new area. We didn't know anything about these areas. Like, we had some overview of some history and everything. Yeah. How do you decide where to push your guys? I mean, the moment maybe you didn't know this time, the moment we step off camp, we really are targetable. And,
absolutely.
So how do you do that? How do you go out knowing you don't have enough stuff? And if you get into a firefight, we're a bunch of CI people. We can't shoot.
I'll tell you, we talked our way out of some bad situations. The Bosnian Serbs were the ones that gave us the most friction. Bosnian Muslims were great to us, and the Croats were great to us. There was a town called Modrica that was Bosnian Serb controlled, and every time we would go in there, we would get a hard time from somebody. And I can remember my little walkie-talkie that they obviously had no idea that it was way out of range of anybody. I sitting in a bar doing our thing, and a couple of Bosnian Serb soldiers were giving us a hard time. And I said, "Listen, I have to check in every 30 minutes with this. If I miss a check-in, I'll die happily knowing that this entire grid square is going to be a parking lot." And they just left us alone. And I literally, when they walked away, I was like, whew, almost got my ass kicked that time. It was tough from the strategic standpoint because you always want a guy, or tactical standpoint, you always want a guy at the vehicle. And that's where, that's the only place that radio was being listened to. And my rule was we're not going to go more than, 350, 400 meters from the vehicle. We'd get in as close as we could, and we had a pretty good feeling in most of the cities. We had done enough legwork with some of the civilians that we knew where not to go, and again, we bought them Game Boys, cigarettes, booze. And so in a lot of those places, they hadn't had any American cigarettes in forever. And, I'm sure, Pete, you remember how many cartons upon cartons of Marlboros they would give us. And I would, we use those as kind of our payment, paying our toll. And it worked. We had in Tremosnica is one of the towns that was in the Croat area. The locals there were more protective of us than they were their own soldiers. They felt like we were kind of like the saving grace. Nothing bad's going to happen as long as there's an IFOR presence in town. They also had no idea if things went to hell in a handbasket. We took a lot of risks. There was not a whole lot we could do. Eric, Pete, and I were talking about the fact that, we got to the point where it was 2 9mm and 2 M16s on a team, and you're like, and carrying a firefight. No, that's what. Yeah, most of these locals didn't understand. If there's a firefight, I'm going to find a secure place for my team to hunker down, and then we'll leave later.
And that was one of the command guidance pieces was, while we are in country, we will never lose a single tactical fight.
Yep.
And that's why, the convoys had to go out. And, what was sad is even from the base camp when we first started in Lukovac, we had to take these massive convoys. Well, right next to it was Lukovac was the Brown and Root contractor camp.
Yeah.
And my roommate from college worked there as a Brown and Root analyst. And so I pulled up, I got my battle rattle on. We've got, you have to have at least one crew serve weapon that goes with each of the convoys, whatever. And I go see this guy, he's in a sweatshirt and jeans.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's making triple what we were making at the time, tax-free. It was just incredible. And it's great to see my roommate. Unfortunately, he passed away very early in his life, but I got a photo with him just to show how distinct it was between what contractor was doing and what the rest of us were doing. And even the Norwegian, the Nordpol Brigade, Norwegian Polish, they were actually, I guess, giving me a hard time while we were up there with the convoy visiting one of the teams. And he said, yeah, you guys have to have convoys wherever you go. And my only answer was, because there will never be a photo of us chained to an air defense site.
That is very true.
You guys had.
Very true. And that's a great answer. Yep. Yeah. It was very, very challenging. And I'm probably, I took more risks than I ever should have with my team. And, it was really because we just felt the need to, I think everybody that deployed in that first group that went in, I think we all felt a really strong sense of responsibility, to satisfy what we had to satisfy, but also to help some of these other warfighters understand the asset that they had. And that if I know there were sites, I know Sergeant Hyde, Liz Hyde was on one of the teams where they would never let them leave ever. And she ended up, and she was one of the best agents I had ever met. And she was literally doing radio watch in the S2 shop all night on a duty roster. And I was livid. I was like, they just don't, some of them just didn't get it. Some of the commanders were really, really good. Some of them had been, I guess they took whatever briefing they needed to get to heart to let us give them what we wanted to give them, as well as satisfying everything else. But it was tough. It was really tough.
That danger element, and you're saying probably took too many risks. When do you realize that? I mean, we took risks too, but that was our job. I mean, our job is dangerous, right? And
it is.
We live in that danger, but we took a lot of risks.
We took a lot more than most people, I think, realize. There was a feeling that we would get especially if we were tasked by the local commander and it wasn't coming from, 165th or our G2. There were some things that they were asking us to do that, some of them were just patently crazy. And I would say, no, that's not what we do. But there were times that we would kind of roll into a city or Abstina, those small little villages. You say city and people have a thought process that's way different than what we actually saw. We'd roll into an area and you just get that feeling. You would see very few people on the streets. And they wouldn't, the big thing is, everywhere we went, Pete, I'm sure you remember, they'd run up to the vehicles, the kids, and they'd be asking for candy or water. And a couple of times we would roll into an area and nobody came up to the vehicle. And I was like, no, we're not staying here. We got to go. It was just that you get that hair on the back of your neck. That's like, nah, this is bad news. So.
And then you just get on the gas and get the hell out of there.
And then, Tom Gage was my driver. And Tom it was funny, before we deployed, I think Tom had driven maybe 300 kilometers in his life in a Humvee. And I was like, well, you're about to earn your driver's badge, son, because you're driving the whole time. And he ended up being a really good driver, but there were times there'd be concertina wire across the road that was thrown there after we went by. And he'd be rolling up on it. He's like, what am I supposed to do? And I was like, gun it. It's a Humvee. Go right through that. If it tears stuff up, we got mechanics that'll fix it. Just keep going. There was a lot of risks, but there was a lot of reward too. We did things there that, when I'm not sure if you knew Eric, both Pete and I were at Huachuca together as instructors.
Right.
And there were things that we had done in country that were very, I remember, what was his name? I think, can't remember his name, but he was a CW2 at the schoolhouse. And when we got there, he was like, you can't say source ops, because what you guys did really wasn't source ops. And I kind of agree with him to an extent. I said, but it was effective. So maybe your version of what a source op is, we would write those reports, Pete, one-time source, multiple contact.
Yeah.
We kind of wrote the book on those small team ops in a way. If not wrote it, we certainly updated it. And, it became effective the way that we were doing things. It wouldn't work in every environment for sure. I mean, there's no way that you could operate that way in the Gulf or, anywhere in Afghanistan. You can't operate that way. But we were fortunate that we were able to operate that way in Bosnia.
And we had recruited sources. I mean, not trying to get classified stuff going on. So I don't know what else you would call that. You may not like that version of it. We may not have gone to Bosnia, but guess what? I went to Bosnia and I'm recruiting sources.
I'm recruiting. Yeah. Well, here's my thing. What makes a source? Well, I've asked him to do this for me and I've given him some form of payment. He's, whether it's, stuff for his family. I mean, I probably shouldn't say it, but we used, the fund that we had. There was a guy that I knew was full of intel. So we replaced the roof on his house. And as long as I could justify that in a report, we were okay.
This is the thing I want to ask you about. I obviously don't want to talk about classified stuff, but I had no idea as a E4 who's never deployed anything about ICF or just incentives that we give to people. Because all we'd ever heard is like, you're a bad collector if you have to use them. And that turned out to be bullshit.
Absolutely not true. It may have been in other environments.
Right.
But the environment we were in there, it went, there's one guy that all we gave him was a Game Boy and some games for his son.
Yeah.
And he ended up I won't say working for it, but he ended up giving us stuff the whole time we were there because we bothered to think about his kid. There was a lot of stuff. I mean, there were people that I met in Gracich who had lost loved ones and they weren't sure where they were, if they were alive. And, we would go into, because we're up in that the upper northern Posavina corridor, literally towns switched hands. You'd have a town that was served before the war and they abandoned it because the ones the Bosnian Muslims had was a nicer village. So they would take their stuff and people would flip-flop and families would lose sight of stuff. One of the guys that I used, I ended up just taking him with us on a convoy to Modrica so he could see his old house. That's all he wanted to do was see his old house. And he became one of the most valuable guys I had because he was a local that we were using as an interpreter. And nobody ever questioned anything he was doing. So it was cool.
One of the best connections that we ever made was an introduction. We got that introduction because I was talking to a guy and where we were, you could tell the homes by the roof type. And then if it went on, you could tell like these were all the Catholics and they killed them all. Or
exactly. Right.
So they were now rebuilding these things. And this guy, I'm like, what do you guys need? What's it like to be you? Just day in life. And he's like, oh my God, we go out every day. We work our asses off trying to rebuild our lives. And we get pounded by this sun. And I'm like, would some sunscreen help? I mean, that's something that I would
exactly. Yep.
Like that'd be like a gift from God. And so we came back the next day. No plans to do this specifically, but we're like, we're gonna bring and just because we were good people and we, it's the Army. We got boxes of sunscreen.
Right.
The guy was like over the moon that we did this. He's like, I want to introduce you to some people.
Yeah. And we had that in Srebrenica, or Srebrenik, excuse me. It was a Croat town. Same kind of thing. We bought their water was horrible and people are always having stomach problems. For some reason, one of the nurses groups or hospitals back in the States, we ended up getting a case of Malox, the liquid Malox. So next time we rolled out of the wire, I kept telling the guys on my team, save everything. We don't know when we're going to need it. And next time we rolled down there, we gave one of the locals a case of Malox. And he gave us a lot of the background stuff that we didn't have yet. He told us who the gun runners were during the war, the routes they were using, the routes they were still using, where some of the caches were. And all because we did something as innocuous as here, man. I hope your stomach feels better.
Yeah.
Malox was great.
I want to ask Eric a question because, you didn't get to know all these things in real time. And maybe you did, I don't know. But like we deploy with literally no training, right? And then we go out there and a lot of us were interrogators. A lot of us were just green.
Yeah.
And you hear these stories. What does that make you think about? Like as a guy who was I'm going to do quote fingers, commander over a bunch of CI people that you never got to talk to?
Well, part of it was that it was more personality driven than anything else. And there is a great book that I read before, and it's from a World War I German commander. It's just called Battle Leadership, and I can't remember his name. And one of the key points that I pulled out of reading that was that you really had to look at the personalities of your subordinates and what they were doing. And so my approach was very specific to the personality of the warrant officer and the NCO on each team. So one example would be if I went down to the Polish brigade, and I know what the heck, I'm trying to remember the warrant officers that was there. Was it Sergeant Daly was one of the NCOs, but the war, I can't remember the warrant officer, but he was fantastic. Everything was squared away. I could tell by the briefings as I was talking to him what he was working on, what he had done. And then I'd go to another team where they had uncooked food on their stove. They had picked up some roadkill and had attempted to do taxidermy of the raccoon or whatever. I don't even remember what it was, but it was there. They did it with like paper and coat hangers. And so basically this dead carcass was inside their team tent. And I was up there with Chaz Owen. I just walked out. I said, you got 5 minutes to square these guys away.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
But that was, again, that was the there's a saying in military was it management by walking around. Yeah. And, when you have 16 teams in country, of which when we all got together to redeploy, you guys didn't even know each other.
Oh, yeah, we
didn't. Folks that were introducing, they had no idea who, who they were. So, absolutely. So we would only get certain snapshots of times on, I could hold my breath in the amount of time I was able to spend on one base camp talking to a team. And then we were off to the next base camp or whatever. So that became a huge piece of, not looking. I didn't care about the briefings. I didn't care about the actual reports. What I wanted to know was what, the simple things of what was your living conditions like? What were your day-to-day routine? And just some of the individual reactions I got, not talking to the warrant officer or whoever, but just talking to soldiers about day-to-day stuff. And I had been around long enough through armors and scouts and everything else to know, especially as soon as I said that, I used to be a Romeo, I was like, okay, so you're one of those guys. I already know the makeup of that person, that he knows what it means to be dirty and tactical and understand that. So that became a big part of doing that. So if I get a message that, hey, Bart Dashko just got PNG'd from a base camp, we got to move him. Well, it never came as a surprise. Like, yeah, okay, well, there's somebody else that wants to kill you, Bart. So let's move you to a different base camp. So it's just that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I gotta, to be honest, it was very much appreciated too, because my team had very little interference from anybody. But I also made my guys get up at a certain time, during the week. If we came back after midnight, I would tell them you don't have to get up till 9. Because we still got to write our reports, and God knows sometimes that took 2 or 3 hours to get them right. But then, my guys, I kept them as much as I could in a routine, because that routine is what's going to save your ass when something does go south. Right. Just knowing that these are the things that I do normally. Like we actually found one of the Nordic brigades, or the Swedes actually. The Swedes had a range near us. That they had taken over a gigantic swath of land, and it was their range. They were qualifying every couple of weeks. So I kept taking my guys over there and fire weapons. So you have that, because you figure, in the U.S. Army, they go to the range. Normally you go to the range, and it's Germany especially. Yeah, twice a year is range week, and then you don't see your weapon again. Right. And I had a lot of tactical concerns, more than operational stuff. The tactical concerns I had for the way that some of the things went down were very off kilter. Mm-hmm. And, I was bound and determined that keep them in a routine and keep them to the point that they understand their value, and don't let anybody else on the base camp devalue what you are and who you are.
Right. That's part, again, what you're fighting against, the base mentality that automatically sets in. Yeah. So when I finally got all the warrant officers together, one of the things I said is like, look, we're going to have a diagnostic PT test when we get back to Germany as part of redeployment. But I said, but there is no such thing in the Army as a diagnostic weigh-in.
That's right.
A couple of them just went nuts. They're like, you got to be kidding me. So they were dying, to diet and change the routine near the end of the deployment, because they knew it's like, no, that counts. And you can get thrown out of the military for failing your weight.
But, that's the thing, is if you don't look the part, you're not going to be the part. Yeah. And you know, we were very lucky that they left us alone for PT on the base camp I was on. All three, me, Mike, and Tom, came back jacked, bigger than I've ever been.
Yeah.
We were in the gym constantly, and we were, you know, a lot of treadmill, a lot of exercise bike. We even got to the point where we'd run around the base camp at like 11 o'clock at night when we knew nobody up in these hills was watching us, and we would do laps until we drove the Humvee around in a circle on the base camp till we knew what a mile was. And then, you know, because I was telling them the same thing, and I think it was when Chaz put it out, and then Paul Holzclaw, and you know, he put it out to us as well. Listen, we're gonna have PT tests when we get back, and I was like, great, we're ready.
There were some who were not.
That is very true. I know. I think I know one of the words that you're talking about.
Yeah, you do. I know you do.
For sure. For sure. But we go ahead. I'm sorry, Pete.
I was going to say, one of the things about the deployment too is because the command culture was so bad before, you know, and we really never got a chance to get to know, at least I didn't, because I redeployed it just ahead of you guys and then went to watch you.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of opportunities to really identify fantastic agents. And I'm going to put myself in this group. I mean, as an E4, I built was supposed to be an impossible softball team for a bunch of CI people. Yep. I maxed on my PT test. I went into NIME. I did all these things. I won every single board I sat in front of.
Yep.
And I got moved around section to section to make sure all those NCOs and ops had an excellent blocks for leadership. You know, I did correspondence courses. I worked my ass off in the field. I collected my ass off. I was a good agent.
It's a shame that we had. It's a shame that we had a lot of NCOs who, and I don't hold any, you know, no ill will against anybody who just came in straight as an agent, but a lot of them who thought they were prima donnas, who thought they were too good for the, you know, the grunt tasks or the day-to-day that you've got to do. Sending soldiers to boards. You're not doing your job if you're not getting a soldier in front of somebody where it can prove his worth. And it used to drive me crazy because, you know, we did have a not the best command atmosphere for a while, and it has nothing to do with you, or not at all.
No,
we had some challenges for sure, and I remember, you know, I got to the 165th as an E5, made E6 there, but I can remember. In fact, there was one first sergeant there. I don't know if you weren't in country yet, sir, but I was an E5 promotable. And he and I clashed constantly. Pete, you know who this is.
Yeah.
And he told me to go burn. We had taken over a farmer's field when we first rolled into country, and he had an outhouse. So that was the latrine for everybody there. Right. And one day he got upset about something that was going on in the talk, and he was like, Sergeant Murray, I need you to go burn shit. And I was like, first of all, we have, you know, tactical E2s and E3s out there that I was like, really? He's like, yeah, go do it. And Paul Holzclaw tried to step in, and I was like, no, Paul, don't worry about it. See, what he did, he failed to give me complete instructions. He just said, burn the shit. So I had Mike Moore go to the motor pool, get me a 5-gallon can of MoGas and a 5-gallon can of regular gas. Mm-hmm. And I poured it into the toilet in the guy's outhouse. And I stood back and threw one of the lighters that we were given, threw a lighter in, and the whole thing, the roof blew off, the whole thing blew up. And he comes running out of the talk, and I'm just standing there watching it. And he's like, what the F did you do? I said, you told me to burn the shit. It's burnt. It was just, but there was that command, that leadership that we had at some points, which was just not in tune. I think when, and I know Eric, you'll agree with this, when somebody is so afraid of failure that they paralyze, mm-hmm. it becomes a toxic environment for the rest of the soldiers in that unit. You have to take your chances. You have to take calculated risks, but you also have to, you know, you got to have a backbone. And if there were some that didn't, and boy, bad NCOs would ruin the entire rest of the operation if they knew they could. Right. And it was a shame for a little while, but the engineers, I have a picture I'll have to share with you, Pete, when the CBs came up and built us a 4-hole shitter, and everybody on the base camp was like, hey, John, you need to go take the first dump in there. I was like, excellent. So I get stuff from people all the time about, oh, you're the guy that burnt down yeah, that's me. Sorry.
Or blew it up.
Yeah.
We did have a commander that had left. I won't talk about which one it was, but they had brought their command photo down with them from Germany into country. And when he gave up command, two of the NCOs, I was years later, I ran into somebody from the unit that I'd known, and he asked me, he goes, "Hey, so what did the soldiers think of this guy?" And I said, you want to know what they thought of him? I said, after he had left, they took his picture out of the frame, they cut his eyes out, they lit the photo on fire, danced around the flames, and then urinated on the photo to put it out. That's what they thought of him. But I don't know. But I didn't know him very well, so I can't comment. But just getting that image, and I had only been in the unit for a very short time. I couldn't believe the amount of animosity that was there, and I said, "This is totally unnecessary." You know, exactly. And there was a lot of other indicators of like everything that I had learned about leadership. It was the wrong thing. And when I read Commander's Guidance, I won't talk about who that was either, but one of the things I saw in it was if it looks good, it will be good. And the emphasis was on everything had to look good. And I rewrote mine to say that if it is good, it will look good. Don't worry about it. You know, don't worry about it from that perspective. Yeah. Yeah. And that was just, you know, the kinds of leadership things that you can run into it. And that's exactly it. Oh yeah. That's the author, Adolf von Schell, that wrote Battle Leadership. Thanks for putting that up. Excellent little yellow pamphlet book. Just was, you know, as a quick read, that was, you know, one of those things that, you know, you'll take leadership courses all day long, but when you really get down to it, you have to listen to the anecdotal pieces of folks that have done it before you.
Sure, absolutely right.
Even if they were on the wrong side.
Here's a great question I've been wanting to ask someone who's a collector that I know and respect a lot, and that's you, John. So no, this is good. When someone's talking, you're an NCO, you're sitting back and your guys are working a guy, and they unlock that person and they start galloping, that source starts talking, and you can see that they've got it. Mm-hmm. What does that feel like? Like, what is that moment when you see it happening? Talk about that, because you and I, it's magic.
Yeah. When it's your guys that you've trained and they're doing something that's different than they've ever done before, it's completely kind of new out of the box, and sitting there and watching them. And I'll tell you, Tom Gage and Mike Moore were two of the best. They were so good at just maintaining whatever they had to when they saw it was working with a source. It literally, I mean, I have kids, I have grandkids. It literally is almost that exhilarating feeling like they broke them. And that not only did they break them, now they're driving them. It was amazing. I literally, a lot of times, I love just sitting back and watching them do their thing. We would go to bars a lot because, you know, early on, a lot of the PIR was centered around, you know, soldiers, who's going to go back and fight, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. Are these units even still a unit? Have they disbanded? And, you know, I was of the old school thought, if you want to talk to a soldier, find a soldier, or learn about a soldier, find a soldier, and they're in bars. And we would be at different parts of the bar. We always made sure we had eyes on each other. And the 1-1 Cav guys hated it because when we did roll out, they'd be sitting out there like, these guys are in a bar. And I could see when Mike or Tom were getting somebody, were breaking them down. And it was beautiful to watch. There were times that I would sit there with a beer, just looking at it. Eric, we didn't drink them. Right. Of course not. There were times I would sit there with a beer and I would just watch.
That would be illegal.
Like, well, I don't know. General Order Number 1 didn't apply to agents. So exactly. It was amazing to see that, Pete. And I know you were one of those agents, or you wouldn't have been at the CIFSO course. It was amazing.
That happened by luck. That happened by dumb luck.
Well, honestly, my assignment there kind of happened by dumb luck too. And I ate it up. Or I'll never forget when the branch manager said to me, right now there's a couple of slots for an instructor at Huachuca. And I was thinking to myself, because when I went to the 165th, I had just finished 8 years at Fort Bragg in the 82nd, almost 9 years. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'll take it. And it was probably one of the more fun. I mean, we had a blast at Huachuca. One of the more rewarding things I got to do was to be an instructor at Huachuca. You know, it can be a career killer for a lot of folks that stay there too long. But I enjoyed it quite a bit.
I've hammered you for a little over an hour with questions. Do you want to ask me anything?
Oh gosh. Wow. I should have prepped for this. Yeah. From the IFOR standpoint. Yeah. When do you know, in your experience, when you had, got to the 165th and boom, you're deploying. when did you know you had good NCO leadership? And I mean, all the way up the chain to the first sergeant or sergeant major. When did you know you had a good chain, or how did you know you had a good chain or a bad one? What was your indicator?
Never had it at the 165th. I only what I know now is that I never experienced any direct good leadership. I had to counsel Sergeant Uter, who was my boss.
Oh God, I remember Sergeant Uter.
And God bless Randy McPeak. I love the guy, but he had no ability to help me at all. I'd go to him all the time, like, "Hey, man, I can't work with these folks." So I never had it. I mean, I put myself in front of those boards. I prepped myself. I went around the battalion and found the guys that won the boards, and I got them coach me. I did those things. And so because if I didn't, no one else was going to do it. I had terrible leadership. I mean, Sergeant Datchko was great he would be a great warrant, which he probably became a great warrant. But
I was stationed with him as a warrant. He was
because he knows this stuff. He just is bad.
Exactly.
I mean,
the book knowledge he had down pat. It was the interpersonal skills that were a little
technically
dicey.
No one got punched in the face, but I'm not going to say anybody didn't get punched in the face on that team.
Exactly. Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, so I never really had a reliable, and so I didn't trust command. I didn't trust NCOs above me. So when I went to Huachuca, I was really gun shy with that. And I don't say I had great leadership at Huachuca, but Nancy Richards, she grabbed me, she brought me over to CIFSO, and she was great. You know, and I knew I could trust her, but it took some time because I had been used over and over again and lied to.
It's tough.
I'll say Paul Norwood's name. Paul Norwood lied to me, and he was a coward. So when you asked me that, I did the work because I thought it was awesome to do it, and it was a lot of fun, and I felt like I was pretty good at it. You know. I wasn't led by anybody on that. I mean, Miss Smith was great. She was super supportive, but undermined by Bart all the time, undermined by Chaz Owen, undermined by Paul Norwood. You know, so no, never.
Yeah, I remember with Chaz, if you could hang in the gym with him for about an hour and a half, you were golden. You know, there were other things that were way more important than that. And I agree with you because I had been through a lot of bad NCO leadership and realized as a young NCO, the only way that you're going to be a good leader is to seek it out in other people and put yourself in the position to be with them, to be under them. Or, you know, when we first deployed, we had leadership issues in that unit. And when they first started determining which teams were going to go where, and they said, you know, this is Gronachitz is the camp's not even there yet. It's going to be one of the furthest away from Tuzla. And I was like, I'm taking that one. I'll take that one now. It was tough. We had some rough leadership. And honestly, I remember for me, when I got there as an E5, everything that I had been through as a leader in the 82nd, I took with me every minute of every day in the 165th because you couldn't, you know, you just didn't have a whole lot of fallback. So I had some good warrants in the 165th. I was very lucky. Steve Pilkington was really good. JP Callahan, he knew his stuff. He wasn't tactical by any sense of the word, but he knew his stuff. If there was a CI question you needed answered, he knew it. You know, he had it, and you could believe what he had to say. As long as it was a specific question and you stopped it there. So I had some good warrants there. But I know the one of the ones you're talking about, Eric, very well. I won't say his name, but he's the one that, you weren't in the unit yet. We were one of the rotations that we did to Hohenfels to prep for Bosnia. He just decided there were 4 CI teams there. He decided we're leaving before everybody else. We were supposed to convoy back with the whole main body that went. 2:00 in the morning, he pulls us out and we leave. I'm at that point, I was an E5 still. And I was like, I am so far down the chain of command on this. I'm not going to be the one in front of the flame. But that's the same warrant who I'm sure you had issues with as well.
Well, that's actually from the story that I got about that was he was directed by his platoon leader when we actually had lieutenants not to leave, and don't leave today. Don't leave until tomorrow.
Exactly right.
2 in the morning, he drove all night through a blizzard.
Yep, through a blizzard
in Germany, and he showed up at 6 a.m. and Darmstadt turned the vehicles in.
Yeah, and I remember again looking really at who all was there, and I was like, there were 2 E6s involved and an E7, and 3 warrants, and I was like, I'm so far down this chain, I'm not going to be the one, you know. And I remember sitting there waiting to leave out and hearing him argue on the radio that we're leaving and we have permission to come back and we're leaving. We don't have to convoy with the main body. And I'm sitting there going, man, this is a career killer. You're about to roll it out and step on it with golf shoes. That was kind of part and parcel to some of the leadership that we had. Yeah, that was crazy.
John, I had 7 NCOs when I was at the 165th. That's my leadership right there. So
that's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. I wish I had you in Wiesbaden. I really do.
Oh, I wish I was there. I mean, I
would have
got along well, and I think he respected the fact that, like, if an E4 is doing all the things I'm doing and I've got a bad attitude, that's because I've got bad leadership.
Absolutely right. The leadership doesn't start at E7 and above. Leadership start if you're made a corporal. I was made a corporal when I was a brag. And then when I was in the 313th, at that point, I was the first corporal that they had in about 14 years. And I took that and ran with it. If you were an E4 specialist and I was the command corporal major, I was locking you up. If you're doing something wrong, you're doing something wrong. Doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah. And
I loved getting the opportunity in the 165th to get some really good specialists. But, Mike and Tom, both of them got out right after, at the end of their first tour, they got out.
Yep.
They weren't staying because of what they had seen in the overall command climate. And it took everything I could with Tom, especially. Tom Gage was a paratrooper. Well, he was a 5 jumper. And I was like, Tom, this is not what the rest of the Army's like, man. Get yourself to brag and you'll love it. You'll be doing your job. Now, Tom he still works for one of the 3-letter agencies in government, and he's doing great. He's got a really great career there. But yeah, we had some toxic, before toxic leadership was a moniker in the military, we were sure going through it.
I think CI especially was just rife with it. There's just too many egos. When I was getting ready to get out, and it was really no doubt anymore, the commander finally, and I'm talking like 21 days before my time was up.
Mm-hmm.
He finally calls up the office and like, hey, I'd like to have Pete come in and talk about re-enlistment. And then Chief's like, too late. He's leaving.
Yeah. Actually,
if you can't recognize talent when it's around you, if you can't lead it to the next spot, then you're not a leader. And that's it. I don't want to get focused on that. Eric, what questions do you have for either of us before we wrap this up?
Oh, just Pete, you need to do a 165th show.
That'd be awesome.
I know you've had other folks. Brian Fuller's been on, Gene has been on. So bring all us knuckleheads on here together and see what problems we can cause. But and then John, I just sent you a PM through Facebook just to get in touch.
Awesome.
Just to catch up. But
excellent.
Again, the 165th was in the time that I spent in the military. I only spent 13 years, got out as a major, but the 165th was the only intel unit I was in. As intel officer, all the rest were combat arms. So it was a culture shock, as you were talking about. And again, it's like, but I learned more from that unit in terms of leadership than I learned anywhere else. And not because it was, things to admire and to emulate, but this, and it's a lot of cases, just this is how not to treat soldiers. This is how not to run meetings. This is how not to, carry yourself personally and expect to have respect, things like that. And that's the thing is like you learn more from the tough jobs. Right. And I'll tell you that this and then the assignment I had afterwards, I had to write my own end of service award when I left the Army because the supervisor that I had, who was an intel guy, never got around to writing it. And I grabbed some infantry lieutenant colonel that was in the building that I worked in. He signed it. He says, okay, yeah, I guess I agree with all this. And I wrote my own award. That's the kind of, and it just, that's the validation of bad leadership. But again, you learn from that. And that's really, I guess, the best part.
Yeah, I agree completely. Absolutely. In life, I think you learn more from your mistakes than your successes.
I don't know how many times I've had somebody say, God, I can't believe, how can you work for this guy? Oh, I've had worse.
Yes, that is true.
This is nothing. So
I've had people say that to me. I've had people say that to me at jobs, and I've said, "Well, nobody's shooting at me. So I'm okay."
I was going to say, Eric, my end of tour award in Darmstadt was awarded to me in the personnel office by an E4, and then my end of enlistment award was downgraded and I already had the award. So
I could tell you about the fiasco of leaving country of when we had to give out awards, and we finally got to the point where more guys kept coming down, and the first sergeant and I ended up having to write. We wrote an award for every single person in the unit except for ourselves.
That's crazy.
Because we couldn't see ourselves. I said, I can't see myself giving myself an award. I'm not doing that, or a medal or anything like that. So everybody ended up getting one except us two.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, by the way. That's not enough.
Very much. No. I mean, honestly, when I left the 165th, they wanted to give me a PCS award, and I was like, you're going to just write the same stuff I've already gotten awards for,
right?
And they wanted to do it anyway, and I didn't get it until I was at Huachuca for about 6 months, and my company commander at Huachuca was like, John, do you want to have a formation for this? I was like, no, that's fine. Yeah. It's going to go on my desk. I'm not putting that on the wall. It's going to go on the desk.
A bittersweet though, right? I mean, that deployment, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything, and I really learned how to be an agent, during that time. So, all that said, all right, cool.
I had the best time spending time with you guys.
Awesome.
I told the previous boss, he goes, "Don't you know these intel guys?" Like, I don't like intel guys. He goes, "But you're one of them." I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah, no, that's true. I said that a million times. There were intel NCOs I met. I don't know if you remember John Sutton, Pete.
Yeah.
I remember him when we were going through some of the classes at the 165th, and I could not stand this guy. He just was one of those intel NCOs that first of all, he should have been put out on the heavy boy program long before I even got to the unit. Never passed a PT test that I know of. Certainly couldn't pass tape. And he was saying something, and I grabbed Mike and Tom, and I was like, we have other stuff to do. And he's like, you need to listen to me. My language ability might save your life. And I went, no. I'm pretty sure you're going to call me for help in Bosnia. And he actually was one of the guys that got tied down to a base camp purposely. They would not let him leave the wire. He was a danger to himself and everybody around him. Yeah. So he was unfortunate, but.
Well, Pete, thanks for letting me sneak on.
Yeah, man, it was a pleasure to have you guys on.
Thanks
If you ever need me to break some knees, Eric, give me a call.
Exactly.
I still do that on the side.
All right, stand by, everybody. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you